After so many years in Iranian incarceration, 5 Americans are flown to freedom, landing in Qatar, in return for $6 billion of unfrozen Iranian assets and 5 Iranians released from American jails. The US Secretary of State defending the swap.
The funds were moved to another bank where we have absolute oversight of how they're used, and they can only be used for humanitarian purposes. And we have absolute confidence in the process and the system that's been set up.
One of the 5, Siamak Namazi, thanked those who'd been his voice, making sure I was heard, he said, when I mustered the strength to scream from behind the impenetrable walls of Evin prison. Among the 5, British joint national Murad Tabaz, whose family had said they were abandoned by the British government while he was in jail. In New York at the United Nations, Britain's Foreign Secretary defended the way Murad's case had been handled.
We have been focused throughout Murad's period of incarceration on getting his full release. And so we've been working very closely with the US government on this. I'm very, very pleased now that he and others will be returning home.
Also leaving Iran and on the way to the UN, Iran's President Ibrahim Raisi. He'll be speaking at the same think tank as the Foreign Secretary is chosen to address on the same day. Mr. Cleverly is defending that decision.
Critics will say he's a man with blood on his hands and that this simply isn't the time for him to be here addressing those kind of panels.
Well, as I say, if he's going to put himself in front of the kind of questions that no doubt will come, then I'd be very interested to see his answers, how he attempts to justify what from the UK's position is completely unacceptable behaviour.
To his very vocal opponents here, President Raisi should be met with handcuffs. Not an invitation to talk at a think tank, also being addressed by a British government minister. But both the UK and America have shown a willingness to maintain a dialogue with Iran, even while it's taking their nationals hostage.
And critics argue is likely to take even more, while it continues being rewarded for hostage diplomacy.
And just live from New York outside the United Nations, and in fact the Iranian president travelling to where you are, Dominic, to the UN General Assembly. What sort of a reception is he likely to get?
Yeah, that's right, Aaron. In fact, he's in a hotel just down the road. I think he's going to be greeted with controversy. He is a man who's regarded by many as having blood on his hands, not just because of the brutal suppression of the unrest that followed the death of Mahsa Amini, an Iranian woman in a jail a year ago, but also his involvement in the execution of thousands of prisoners of conscience back in the 80s. He was one of 4 judges on what was called a death panel. So there are some here who say he should be greeted with handcuffs and be arrested. Of course, that's not going to happen. He's the leader of a country. It's the United Nations General Assembly, and he's going to be addressing that. There is more controversy about those organisations outside the UN who are inviting him to talk at their events, particularly the Council on Foreign Relations that the British Foreign Secretary James Cleverly is going to be addressing as well, but not part of the same event. So there's controversy, but at the same time there is an effort by the American government and other Western governments to have some kind of easing of tensions with the Iranians. I think there's a recognition that the Iranian nuclear deal that Donald Trump blew up is not going to be put back together, but there is an aspiration, I think, to ease tensions, reduce sanctions and try and persuade the Iranians to behave more responsibly. So I think that's part of what's happening here this week diplomatically, and I think the families of hostages who've been released and others still being held are slightly uneasy by the fact that that hostage diplomacy, that effort by the West to get their hostages back, although it's going to put families back together, is encouraging the Iranians to take more, but it also is too much part of that diplomatic effort to ease tensions with the Iranians, and therefore may encourage the Iranians to do more of what is this despicable process and practice of taking British and American and other Western nationals hostages to try and get political gains in return.